Good morning, everybody, and welcome to my session, which is about how easy it can be to migrate content to Microsoft Teams. Migration does not necessarily always have to be easy, but my experience is that you can often get very far with a relatively simple means. My name is Magnus Goksøyr. I'm Swedish, and I work in Norway, where I work as a Microsoft 365 solution architect for an IT company called Skill. And over the years, which are starting to become many now, I have been involved in many projects regarding the implementation of Microsoft 365. And for the past 5 years, I have worked exclusively with Microsoft Teams. In these projects, migration has almost always been an important part of the project. And today, I'm going to share some of my experiences and what I have learned works best when it comes to migration, at least for me. When I now talk about migration, it is about moving documents from existing systems into Microsoft 365 and with a focus on Microsoft Teams. And I guess many of you here have seen or witnessed that companies have used Teams just to be able to have meetings and to be able to have chat with each other. But too often you have forgotten that you can and should actually use Microsoft Teams also to collaborate on documents. So that's why we have to get these documents into Teams. So what's the purpose of this session? I would like to start by showing you the importance of a holistic, comprehensive approach and show some preparations that are smart to make before you start the move. That migration does not have to be so technically complicated, even though it can be. That our information owners and end users are indispensable resources if we are to succeed, and how far you can go without having to use migration tools or scripting, and when you need to use the migration tools. And of course, that planning ahead is the key to success here too, as always. So, what are you going to move into? Well, first of all, you should make sure that the standard of your new accommodation does not look like this. The following basics should be in place before we even consider moving in. The goals and the strategy should be developed and anchored with the management. We must ensure that we have a standardized, secured, and controlled platform and services, and that you have governance and change management in place, and that you have course material and a help center so that the end users at any time can easily see the overview of our common way of working, which tool they should use, when and how. And of course, also a communication plan during the move process to communicate the right information at the right time to the organization and the users. With all this in place, we can say that the platform or the collaboration platform is set up to support the organization's security and functional requirements. So in what order should you take it? Well, I think you should start by making it possible for your departments to get started with their internal collaboration. The end users become accustomed to collaborating internally and gain an understanding of what is our internal work, what is external, and what is cross-organizational. And when the end users have become accustomed to collaborating internally, and it has become painfully obvious often that there is also need for a collaboration across the organization, then it is time to create and move into the cross-organizational teams. So this is the order I think it should be done in, with organizational teams first, then cross-organizational, and finally project teams and networks, external collaboration. Once you know what team types you should have and in what order you should move into them, it is time to create them and adapt them and customize them to the main topics and the content they should support. For each team, you can create an extra document library where we can add historical files. I like to call it a museum because the museum is where we can store non-active documents that needs to be kept only for reference in the future. And this could also, of course, be an extra document library or museum per channel if you want to structure it in that way. For example, if you want to have different access rights on your active documents and your history. And once you have migrated all content into the history files and to the active files, you should set these museum libraries to read only. So they are for reference only and no one can edit the documents that resides there. Now we have the organizational teams in place with the right team settings, with the right channels that unify posts and documents in the right context. And we have preferably prepared with some suitable folders in each channel. And for each channel under the files folder, you should create the folders to which you want to move your active work documents. And please remember that you should not have more than 3 levels on your folders. Otherwise, it quickly gets messy and you lose the overview and the context you're in. So now you're almost ready to start. Your new teams are set up and configured with the structures that are suitable for your business. And all employees should also have received the training needed to be able to work with the right tools in Microsoft 365 in the right way and not at least in the same way. But before we move, we must clean up. There is no point in moving outdated, irrelevant documents into files in Teams channels where you are supposed to actively collaborate and work on your current working documents. So documents that can be deleted from the old sources should be deleted first. And this is not a job for one individual. So you should transfer this responsibility and tasks to the information owners with the homework on throwing away everything that is not worth keeping. Quite boring, tedious job, but it's better to do it in the source than to do it afterwards when you have moved it. Then it will never be done, like when you move into a new house or apartment. So now we have thrown away everything that is old and should not be allowed to accompany the move. We need to know which remaining types of documents that are to be moved. Which documents that should be moved is something that all information owners need to know before putting them to work. So it is impossible for them to understand this on their own. So here you need to create and distribute a manual that clearly describes the types of documents to be moved and where to move them. So it is very important that you know the type of documents that you're going to handle and that you divide them in an easy to understand way, not least for the super users or the information owners. So we have 4 types of documents as I see it. It's active, internal, working documents. That are documents that you as team members produce, write, and collaborate on within your team. And these documents should be moved to the relevant team, channel, and folder. And once these documents have been moved, you will continue to work together on them in this team. Second, you have the historical documents. That are documents that have no value today, but which may have a value in the future. And these documents can be moved to the museum or something like that for future reference. And when the content has been moved to the museums, they will be available for read-only for all members of your team. Third, we have the active working documents that are shared with others outside of your team. These are documents that are shared and must continue to be shared with non-team members. If we move these documents into an organizational team, for example, for your department only, the sharing with those people will cease, and therefore they should be moved to your cross-organizational network teams when you have those in place. Last, we have the control documents that should not be moved into Microsoft Teams at all, as I see it. For example, if you have a quality management system or with manuals, etc. These types of documents should only be editable by a few people and available for reading by all people. If we should have put them in a team, then they would be editable for all members of the team. And that is something that we don't want to do. But where do we have all these documents today? I'm sure you will not find one individual in the organization who has a complete overview and knowledge of where all the documents of the different departments are located. I also doubt that all documents are stored where they should be. So most probably you have not had any clear guidelines for document storage so that everyone in the organization has had knowledge of where documents really should be stored. And with this in mind, I'm pretty sure you will be faced with the following scenario. You probably have documents lying around on different SharePoint environments and sites. And I'm convinced that you have a lot of files on your OneDrives, both files that should be there and those that do not belong there. Now, OneDrive has been around for a long time now, and everyone loves OneDrive. And in OneDrive, everyone has been able to create folders and structures that suits them best. In addition, you probably have many end users who love to synchronize their OneDrive to local disk so that they can work with the files in Windows Explorer, because that is how they have done it through the years. And most likely, you will experience that there is a messy mix of personal files and shared Word documents that are stored on various OneDrives in the organization. In my world, my OneDrive should only be used for my files and not the files I collaborate on with my colleagues. But unfortunately, this is not the reality everywhere, or almost nowhere. The content on OneDrive is thankfully easy to move manually when you know what to move and where to move it. We'll take a look at that soon. Okay, so we have documents on SharePoint and on OneDrive. And I'm sure we still have some old trotters who think that the best thing is to save all the files on the hard disk. Then they know where the files are, and there's no risk that someone will access them and can see them. They think so anyway. File shares is a legacy that everyone lives with, and probably 90% of the content is totally irrelevant. In order to deal with the content on the file shares, the help of an archaeologist they probably needed to be able to distinguish what is antique rubbish and what are actually important and relevant files that must be taken care of. Your documents are thus most likely stored in different places, and you must get a good overview of these documents and their sources. And regardless of whether the information owners or end users have to move files manually or whether you have to do large parts of the work with the migration tool, you need to transfer the mapping work to those who actually own and know the information. And here they need to analyze and document it so that they have a list to start from when they start with the migration. Now that you have a list of all the sources, you hopefully have a good overview of where all the documents are. And now it's time to find out which documents are to be moved where. Here you can start by noting which files are active working documents that belong to the organizational team, for example, to your department. These are the office files that you and your team actively collaborate on. Then you should make a list of the documents that are currently shared with people that are not members of your organizational team. These documents should not be a part of a department team unless you want to create a sharing chaos in the long run. Of course, you can technically share documents with people who are not members of the team, but then you lose the whole thing with Teams, and also you immediately lose the overview of who has access to what. And that is a place where you don't want to land. It is a reality that everyone has documents that can be nice to have in the future. They may not have any value right now. They may have been created 5 years ago, but they are still that important that you need to be able to go back to them to see its contents for future reference. And this is the type of documents that we want to have available, but which should not interfere with our daily work. So we should not place them in a Teams channels in files. Instead, we move them to an extra document library that I call museum often, or an archive. So where are we now? All employees have received the training needed to be able to work in the right way and in the same way. Your new teams are set up and configured with the structures that are suitable for your business. You have identified the sources where your files are stored. You have deleted all the redundant and irrelevant files. And you've identified the documents that are active working documents, historical documents, and documents that are shared with people outside of your team. So how should we move all documents? And as usual, here comes my consultant answer. It depends. Many people place the trust in complete automation of everything. They set up cross-reference tables, giant mapping tables, build advanced scripts with various logic. And that can be a good solution when you know what to move and when you have a clear overview of both sources and targets. But here we must not forget the power and knowledge of our end users and information owners. With today's functionality in Microsoft 365, we come a long way by letting our end users and information owners take and have responsibility for their own information and let them move their content manually and structured under controlled forms. At the same time, this creates a great awareness among them regarding what is to be stored where and how the services in our collaboration platform, Microsoft 365, is connected and divided. Thus, it also has a learning effect that makes the process of change and the implementation of a common way of working much clearer and easier. So do not underestimate the power of your information owners and end users. You should instead use them. There will almost always be a need to use migration tools. Not everything can be moved manually, and not everything should be moved with tools. So during the remainder of this session, I will focus on how easy, more or less, it can be to let the users move their information themselves. And my experience is that with some principles and simple manuals and some training, this is not only possible, but it also adds a lot of value, both in terms of knowledge and control. So which method should you use? Well, I am personally a big supporter of the keep it simple principle. Content that can be easily moved manually should be moved manually, and then by those who own the information. If content is to be moved from SharePoint Online or OneDrive, then the move to function is your best friend. Then you include all the versions and the attributes modified and modified by. If content is to be moved from SharePoint Online or OneDrive and files with many versions, but it is sufficient to bring the latest version of the documents, and that it is not so important to bring the modified and modified by properties, then the copy to function is fast and effective. But then you must remember to delete the files from the source when they have been copied. And if you have content on a file share or local hard drive, you can simply select upload when you are in files in the correct channel in a team. It is then important to keep in mind that the attributes modified and modified by are stamped with your username and the time of copying. And you must also then remember to delete the files from the source after copying them, since you only do a copy. And when migrating content from a file share to Teams, it can be smart to use a migration tool, as it is often more stable and faster than manual upload in Teams. And if you're going to migrate content from SharePoint on-premises, well, then there is no doubt that you should use a migration tool. So we will take a look at the following scenarios. First, manually move documents from existing sites in SharePoint Online to Microsoft Teams. Second, manually move documents from OneDrive for Business to Microsoft Teams. Third, move documents from existing sites in SharePoint on-premise to Microsoft Teams. And last, move documents from file shares to Microsoft Teams. When to manually move documents from SharePoint Online. Like I mentioned earlier, This you can do typically when you have few versions, when you want to bring all these versions with you, and when you want to keep the values of the attributes modified and modified by on the files. And of course, there are some important limitations to know. And as I often say, just because you can move many files at once doesn't mean that it's so smart and that you should do it. So I recommend that you make the move in a controlled manner and that you do not move more files or folders at the same time than you have control and then can easily verify that everything has been moved. And if you're on a shaky internet connection or Wi-Fi, it is not so great idea to try to move 200 files, some of which may have many versions. Then you should preferably use a wired connection and move small amounts at a time until you are done. Then you are in great control. Those who are to move documents to the team first need to follow the Teams SharePoint site. And when you follow the Teams SharePoint site, you will see all the channels and folders. And this makes it much easier to find the team when you use the move to or copy to. And do not forget that if you have one or more private channels in the team, you must also follow the respective private channels SharePoint site for it to be visible the same way for you when you select the move to or copy to function. Classic versus new experience. That's also important when you're doing the manual move. If your content is in SharePoint Online and the source library still has classic experience, then you need to enable the new experience for the move to and copy to buttons to be available. This is very easy done when you go into the advanced properties of the document library. So, moving active documents. When you are in the source, you just select one or multiple files or folders that is to be moved to a channel and or a folder in that channel in the team. Then, when you have selected it, you press move to, and then you choose the name of the team, which is visible for you. Here, you click on Documents to get an overview over all channels, and you select the target channel where you want to move the files to. And then you press Move here, or if you want to, you select the subfolder of the channel and press Move here. Now, please keep in mind that the more versions a file has, the longer this manual move will take. If there are files that have many versions, and then I mean a lot of hundreds of versions, it may be worthwhile to use a migration tool instead. Or you can also simply use the copy to copy only the latest version. But then, like I said earlier, you do not preserve the modified and modified by properties, and you will only get one version. And you will also need to go back to the source to delete it from the source when you have moved it. Always verify. But why? Now, I may have a greater need for control than many others, but I always want to be absolutely sure that all content has been moved. It is not such a very motivating or stimulating job to have to go and look in the recycle bin of the various SharePoint sites after move has failed. If I had used a migration tool, I would probably had a nice log to analyze after the move. But when I move documents manually in this way, I have no such log to check after the move. So no matter where you move or copy content, or whether it is active or historical files, you should always verify that the content has been moved before deleting it from the source. When you use the move to, the files disappear from the source when they are moved. But with copy to, as I said earlier, you need to delete them from the source afterwards when you have verified. Done. The documents are now moved from SharePoint to the team and to the channel and folder you selected. And because we used move to, all versions has been preserved. It's not harder than this. You're in the loop now, and of course we hope that the loop is not an eternity loop. So now you just repeat this operation until all files have been moved from the source. And once you're done with the source, just continue with the next source and do the same operation. That's manually moving from SharePoint to Teams. So let's just sum up some of the takeaways and technicalities regarding the move to function. You should follow the Teams and any private channels SharePoint site. Then you will find the target faster when you use the function move to. Before you can use the move to function in SharePoint Online, you must enable the new experience on the source document library if that hasn't already been done. And when you use move to, the history of the document is copied to the new destination. And when a file is moving, technically, it continues to appear in the source directory until it's fully moved to the destination, and then it will be deleted. And the file remains in the recycle bin after the move is complete and is subject to the normal recycle schedule unless the user recovers it from the recycle bin. But what about when you need to manually move historical documents to the museum? That's what I call the extra document libraries, where we place the historical files that should not bother us or disturb us in their active working channels. Then it assumes the same preparation as the previous example, but since we have already activated the new experience on the libraries and are already following the Teams SharePoint site, we do not need to do those activities again. Moving historical files is no more complicated than moving active files to a channel. We move them exactly the same way, but instead we move the historical files to another additional document library on the same Teams SharePoint site. So what you do here is in the source library, you select documents or folders, and then you click move to. And you select the team and then select the document library that you want to move the documents or folders to. And then choose the folder to which the files are to be moved. And here it is a great idea to put them in a subfolder that has an intuitive name that explains where they have been moved from. For example, you create a folder called from SharePoint, one from OneDrive, one from file shares. So you find it easier afterwards. And again, always here, always verify. Go back to your document library that should contain the moved documents that are historical and verify that they are in the right place. And same here, repeat this operation until all historical files have been moved from the source. Once you're done with the source of the historical files, just continue with the next source and do the same operation until you're done also with this. As I mentioned in the beginning of this session, there is almost always a person who is happy to save everything on their local hard drive. A good way to get these people to use OneDrive instead, or also, is for the organization to set up known folder move. That way, they can continue to save their personal documents and photos seemingly locally, but they will be synced to OneDrive and thus available from other devices and available even if you should lose the device. In addition, if these users have files located locally on their hard drive, and these files are actually to be moved to a team in connection with the moving process, it is much easier to move the files from OneDrive to Teams using move to than using upload in the team. When you move documents from OneDrive, you do not need to think about activating the new experience, since this is the new experience. And here everything works in the same way as we saw when we moved files from SharePoint Online. You just select the files or folders and select Move To. And then you choose which team it should go to, or which channel, or perhaps to historical documents. And again, always verify. Go back to your document library or channel and verify the files are in the right place. And repeat. As you see, you have to repeat a lot of repetitive work here, but it's the same for SharePoint, it's the same for OneDrive, it's the same for everything that you do. When you need to move content from SharePoint on-premise to Teams or SharePoint Online, then it's time to use a migration tool. On these occasions, for example, you often need to authenticate yourself to the different environments with different users. It is also about performance, that you want to keep the properties and attributes of the files you are moving. So the files must be deleted from the source after they have been copied, since it's only a copying function. The same is true when migrating content from file shares to Teams or to SharePoint Online. Ensure you can use the drag and drop to copy, and it works okay for small amounts of information. But you will get the most stable and best performance with a migration tool. And you can maintain attributes and properties and make necessary mappings if needed. So with that, it's time for me to tie up the sack, and I will do so with this summary of what I've been through in this session. I think you can go very far by focusing on the following points. First of all, make sure that your organization has a secured and controlled and standardized platform. But why is this so important? Well, partly because you want to be sure that you do not move your files to an environment that is not secured and set up correctly. And you want to be able to trust that your information is secure. 2, make sure you establish uniform, easily accessible guidelines on where the information is to be stored. That's because the actual document migration may be a one-time job, but you want to be sure that everyone in the future continues to store the information they produce where it belongs. And don't forget to conduct educational training and create user-friendly moving in manuals for information owners and end users. What we have looked at during this session is not something you can expect an end user or the information owners to know and master by heart. 4, a limited number of team types for the organization's collaboration needs. The organization needs to be very clear on what types of teams to use, and that these types of teams are configured and secured based on how they will be used and who will have access to the information in them. And it's important to have well-furnished teams. It must be easy to understand where to store the information and thus where to find the information as well. Posts, files, notes, tasks, and apps must be available in the right context. The right teams with the right channels that are structured in the right way makes it easy to know what to move, where, when to move into the teams. You must have a clear overview of the sources. Well, if you do not know where the information is located, it will not be very easy to find it or know where to move it or how to move it. Major cleaning, the fun part. When you move from an old house, you do not want to bring old rubbish that you have collected over the years that you will never use again. In that case, you rent a container and you throw away everything that you are not going to pack with you. And the same applies when you move information. Bring out the large broom, take the opportunity to clean before you move, because otherwise it will never be done and will just be that you have upgraded your mess. 8, get a clear overview of your document types. You need to find out which files are active files that belongs to your department, which files should be shared across the organization, and which files that needs to be shared with the guests, and which files that are useful history. And of course, point 9, you need a clear overview of the targets. Those who are going to work on moving the files need to know where to move the files. And when you do this manually, you need to work methodically. Do not do everything at once, but start with internal files and continue to work methodically with the rest. And the last point, do not forget the final cleaning. You do not want to risk continue to store new documents in the old bins from which you have moved the information. When all documents have been moved from an old source, delete it. If the content is not physically moved, but only copied, You may instead choose to archive the source. Regardless of what, you should not be able to continue storing new information there. So now you have moved into Teams, and now you will continue to live there for many happy years. And that was it. I hope you have learned something useful and that my session met your expectations. And here on the screen, you can see the social medias where you can find and connect with me on, and you can feel free to follow me and send me a message if you want to know more about the details. And
excellent.
Yeah.
Thanks, Magnus. So there were a couple of questions that dropped in at the end there.
Yeah.
So one of them from Vincent was, what is the recommendation for making the museum folder read-only when you have a lot of teams to set up?
The recommendation for making it read-only?
Yeah.
I think it would take some time before you have moved all the historical information in there. But once you're done, the information owner or the team owner should know when you're done with all the historical files. Then you set it to read-only for the members, but the team owners can still be a member or have edit access to them.
And that would be using the standard SharePoint permissions on that document library.
Yeah, you do that on SharePoint. And then, of course, it's searchable, it's viewable. And if you need to call it reactivate the file from there later on, you can just copy it from the museum and into the right channel where you want to continue work with it.
Excellent. Hopefully that answers your question, Vincent. The next question we had was from Jim. Do we care about the list view threshold of 5,000 items when copying content into the museum folder? Thinking of monolithic file shares with many, many items.
I don't think of that threshold anymore, actually, especially not when it's just for looking up documents afterwards. If it should have been to an active file, active channel in Teams, I would have considered it. But if you have so many files with so deep structure, I think you should have done a better cleaning up job in advance, actually, or perhaps store them another place.
Fair enough. Jim, hopefully that answers your question as well. Excellent. So, well, thanks for that, Magnus. I thought that was a great session. I really like the tip to people who are migrating to follow the site so that they can see the libraries in that move to dialogue. That's a great tip.
It's great. And do not forget the private channels, because otherwise you will not see them.
Yeah. Obviously in a different site, aren't they? Oh, another question that's just come in from Kinyu Patrick is, besides PowerShell, is there any function in SharePoint or Teams to add 100 participants, i.e. all emails are of the same university's domain in one go?
Could you take that one again, please?
Yeah. Besides PowerShell, is there any function in SharePoint or Teams to add 100 participants, i.e. all mails are of the same university's domain in one go?
I really do not understand that question.
No, I don't. I'm not sure about that question either. Can you explain a bit more about that? Let's see whether we can unmute you and see whether you can ask the question. Where are you? Oh, lots of people in there. Right. Allow mic.
Yeah. I mean, if I need to add 100 students.
Patrick, can you try asking the question? You should be able to unmute yourself.
How to bulk add 100 people?
Sorry, I just realized my mic is on. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I'm not that expert in IT, so I just want to ask. I need to organize online workshops many times. Okay, each time I use Microsoft Teams channel for them to work with the students. Okay, so in the past I need to add 100 students one by one into the channel because I don't know other method. Okay, I overheard that there people use PowerShell to add multiple users, multiple people into the same channel, but I'm not that familiar with PowerShell. That's why I would like to ask if there is other method to do so in either Microsoft Teams or SharePoint. Thank you.
But if you have all those users in a group, in a Azure AD group, a security group, you could use that one and add it if there's the same members all the time. Otherwise, I think it's PowerShell that is the solution, and you have a file to import and populate it with.
Do you mean I need to create? Sorry, I'm very basic. So how can I create a user group within, for example, 100 students? Their email address are all of the same domain under my university.
Yeah. Are all those students member of one and the same team?
Yes. Yeah. But before I add them into the teams, I need to add 100 students into the Teams channel first. How can I create such a list or a group?
I really do not have the answer to that right now, but you can always please take contact with me. Here you see my contact information on the screen, and this presentation will be available afterwards.
Yes,
you can elaborate it, and we can look at that special case.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I didn't ask very clearly.
Oh, no problem.
That's fine. We're here to try and answer as many questions as we can.
Absolutely. But please contact me, and I will try to help you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and as Patrick, as Magnus had up on the screen, please do fill in the feedback form as well. We always look to improve the sessions and to improve the conference. So I've just put the link into the chat as well.
Yeah, great.
Excellent. Well, in that case, Magnus, thank you very much. Great session, really useful. And I will put up the holding slide for the next set of sessions that are taking place. There are a lot of sessions going on, so let me just put that up. And thank you very much for your session.
Thanks, Alan, and thank you to all for taking your time. Goodbye.